Hey everyone, thank you for coming. This became possible because a lot of the feedback we got was about nervousness about careers and sort of what resources Career Services and SICE and IDEV had to help you through your process, both for internships and for full-time jobs. So I think this is a good representation of how the survey really does help, and we appreciate all your feedback and we hope this helps. So we have some really great students, and Sethi from Career Services and Tanvi, talk about sort of questions you have and really guide you through this process and sort of how they've navigated the job search themselves. I have a few really basic questions that we'll start with, and then afterward we'll open the floor to all of you to ask the questions that are most top of your mind. So the first thing, I'm sure most people know you, but could you give a very brief background about who you are and what you did before SICE and what you kind of been focusing on since?
You can start.
I guess.
I'm Henrique, I'm from Brazil. Before SICE, I worked for 2 years with political risk at a consulting firm, and then 2.5 years in a macroeconomic consulting firm as well, and then I came to SICE, so my background is a lot of econ. Okay.
My name is Jennifer. I was from China. Before coming to SICE, my background was mainly in journalism. In social enterprise, I worked for a social enterprise for 2 years in Shanghai, and interned for venture capital for half a year. So it's a very mixed background.
Hi, I'm Debolina. I'm from India. Prior to SICE, I was working with an NGO in Bangalore, which was basically skilling young people for what we call 21st century jobs, so mostly in the digital sector and so on. And before that, I was in the private sector, but also in a learning and development sort of role, so that's kind of been a theme throughout.
Hi everyone, my name is Carolyn. Before SICE, I had primarily worked with NGOs, two based in New York. One's called Madre, the other is the International Rescue Committee, working in strategic partnerships, business development, and also program design. And I've been studying similarly to the folks at SICE, or the things that I was doing before, but also branching out a bit to do a lot of work in the humanitarian sector and focus on gender.
Okay. And I'm Setu Van Laer Hodges, and I think I've met one-on-one with almost everybody in this room. The two I haven't met with, I'm looking forward to.
Great, thank you. So I think the next question is, how have you sort of used the school resources, both IDEV and Career Services, to help you approach your job search?
So I'm gonna say something first is that it's super intimidating as someone non-American to come here and talk about jobs, because at first you think that it looks like every American has a plan about their life in 10 years, and that's not how I approach jobs in Brazil. So it took me a year to talk with Setu, because apparently you need to have all the documents ready about where you want to work and what is the salary and who you're going to talk about. And it was like, I don't know, I like IDEV, I came here to study, and at first, don't do that. So go to talk with Setu the first week of classes, and be open with the professors about what you want to do with life and questions, because sometimes here the form of what you do things is more relevant than the content. That's my impression. So now working, there's a way of doing, there's a way of sending emails to ask for a coffee. You have to learn as soon as possible. It's not a big deal, and if you do that in the first semester, you have time to explore other things and to figure out what you want to do in life. So I think I went to talk to Setu a couple of times, not in my first semester, and with a couple of professors at IDEV and other departments too.
Actually, can I just pop in here
Yeah.
quickly? So you mentioned, all the documents, and I think it can be intimidating when you have to submit. We used to make you submit your, professional development plan, and yes, we ask you to identify employers. Of course, we want you to start thinking about who you're going to be targeting. But what we've done recently is you can come in and meet with one of the career coaches without uploading all of those documents. We still want you to do it, and we're going to talk to you about it when you come in, but it used to be that you couldn't even get an appointment until you did that. So you can come in, we have open hours now, Monday through Thursday from 10 a.m. to 12 and 2 to 4. For those of you who are used to making appointments, that may not always work. If you can't come during our open hours, or if you want to see me specifically or one of the other coaches, and you can't come in during those open hours, send me an email. send us an email and we'll fit you in at another time. So we absolutely want to make sure that you have access. We're trying to take away all of those barriers because we just want you to come in. We want you to start the process early. And then another thing, I'll say, and then I want, they want to hear from you guys, is, when I'm asked by, first year students, if I want to have a job, when I graduate or, very soon after, what should I be doing? And when I think back to those students, who do have a job, but, there's this magic date in May. It doesn't always work that way, but they start early and they keep up the momentum. So, yes, start early, and keeping up the momentum is hard because, you do have to prioritize academics. And there are times when you can't, do as much of the outreach, but doing just a little bit, carving out time to just do a little bit each week. Sorry.
Thank you. Like he said, I also use the career service pretty often. As an
Can you talk
Can you talk
loudly
to the
and right
microphone?
into this because we've got also
Okay.
Bologna here.
Can you guys hear me? Wave your hand if you can hear me.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I have used career service pretty often the first year. As an international student and non-native English speaker, I brought my resume and cover letter all the time and asked for some suggestions on how to revise it. It's important because sometimes the consultant will tell me she couldn't understand what I wrote. She couldn't understand my job functions because it was coming from my perspective and in the language that I am used to. So it's very helpful to have someone to revise it for you. I started networking pretty late, probably this time when I realized I really need to find an internship for the summer. The career service website before usually gave us weekly newsletters on the job opportunities. I think now you have to subscribe on Handshake and then define your interest field so that they can keep you posted. I found that if you apply for jobs that with an alum email under there, they are more likely to reply to you. If not giving you the interview, at least just get connected with you. So that's how I got my summer internship in a microfinance institution last summer. It was in New York, and they focused on South Pacific. The CEO of the company was a site alum. That's how we get connected and started the interview process. I heard from a lot of Chinese students who ended up getting a job in IMF and World Bank. They started their networking pretty early and then ask for 2 contacts every time you finish an informational interview. And usually that's how they end up getting the job.
I would say, in addition, of course, to the fantastic, your professors and the career services both here and in Bologna, I've tried to approach them as frequently as I can. A few resources that are maybe slightly lesser known, but that also you do get to access from SAIS is, one is the DevX membership that IDEV provides in your second year. I've found it super, super helpful. There's a lot of articles on the latest findings in too close. Just all the articles, there's a lot of career advice, a lot of jobs posted there, so the DevX website definitely has been an excellent resource. Sometimes your readings and books that are sort of recommended in your course material can be a great resource. I know it sounds a little weird, but for instance, in the M&E course, one of the books that we had was basically the World Bank's Impact Evaluation Guide, and it literally has stata code that you use to run an impact evaluation, and it's just been super, super helpful in preparing for the job hunt. So that's another source I'd say. And finally, your friends here at SAIS are an excellent resource. So many organizations that I wouldn't have got to know about had I not known someone who's interned there or worked there. So definitely, beyond your amazing teachers and career services, there are a lot of other resources that SAIS also provides.
I won't repeat what everybody else said because I really largely agree. I think that one thing about the networking journey is that Satu was very helpful for me early on. I think I started going to week 1 of class or 2 of class, and what I thought was kind of a shift that I needed to do in my mind was not just to look at networking as a way to get a job, but looking at networking as a way to really explore what you want to do. And I think that at first it very much felt like I needed to have it like an interview, like it needed to be like an interview of sort of selling my, making my case for why, this person would go back to their office and talk about me or hire me or whatever. And I just think that the most valuable networking experiences I had and informational interviews that I had with alumni who are willing to meet with me, who, by the way, all of them are. Like, sometimes I just you don't hear from people because everybody's so busy, but everyone that you hear from, in my experience, has been so positive and so eager to meet with me because they've been exactly where we are. So that's been really nice. It gets easier after you do it because you get really positive responses from people. But when you're actually having that conversation with them, asking questions and opening yourself up to things that you came into SICE not really knowing whether you want to do. For me, it was monitoring and evaluation. I had like a moment where I was like, maybe that's what I want to do. And I had a few conversations and I was like, nope, not at all. But it was very helpful to have those kind of exploratory conversations and not feel like every informational interview you had is like a high stakes meeting. It really should be exploratory. It really should be getting to know people, just building, your network of people that you might not need to send a job application through later, but might be a sounding board for you in the future if you are having a question. Oh, maybe I do want to revisit the idea of monitoring evaluation or whatever it is. So I think that, have a purpose, have good questions, but don't feel the need to make your case every time you meet with somebody.
Perfect, thank you. So you already kind of touched upon this already, but how have you sort of approached your job search, both for internships and for post-sites? Jennifer, you want to start this time? And then we take a break.
Okay. I need like 30 seconds.
Or anybody else if they want to start first.
What was the question again? Sorry.
How have you approached your
The
job search?
Okay. Just waiting for them to talk first. So I know it was. I can
sure.
start. So yeah, I think that to just feed off my last point, I think that the networking and the sort of exploratory part of my time at SICE has been really important. Coming into SICE and knowing the field you want to be in, knowing you want to be in development. For me, I knew that I wanted to be in the humanitarian space. It really has taken a lot of avenues, and I would say when you do have the opportunity to sort of take a step further and apply for a job or apply for an internship, what I found myself doing during this job search has been, there was a time that I was thinking I would go into domestic policy and advocacy, and I wrote a cover letter and I made a new resume that was specifically tailored to the ACLU, and it was this is the position that is in domestic policy and advocacy. And I read it and I was like, does this sound like me? Does this sound like me? And I read it again and I ended up not sending it. It was for an internship this year. I ended up not sending it because I thought to myself, that was a helpful exercise to go through and to challenge myself to come up with the skills, the tools, the interests, the passions that I have and see if this is a good fit. And by the end, I realized that maybe it wasn't. And there have been other times that I've drafted those things and sent them just in case it is a fit. So, I know I'm kind of encouraging people to just be all over the place and let yourself be all over the place, but that's what SICE is for, and I think there's a lot of actual really tangible advice and tangible soul searching that I've been able to do during this process, and also make myself therefore feel better about the fact that it might not all work out immediately, right? That soul searching is valuable because you're making the choices that are ultimately going to lead you to a place that you personally believe in, and I think that that's what we come here to do. And so I've been trying to follow that voice and be kind to myself if it isn't all working out in the way that I originally thought that it would. So that's what I'd say.
I'd say in terms of the job hunt strategy, coming from Bologna, it's quite different because when you're in Bologna the first year and looking for a summer internship, your options are quite different from what it is in DC, and you might even be looking at a completely different kind of sector or different kinds of jobs that are available over while you're there, and so your strategy has to change quite a bit once you do land in DC. And I'm only saying this not to make anyone worry, but just to sort of be prepared that when you do get here, you might have to have a slightly different way of approaching the job hunt strategy. But in terms of not, looking for jobs, I'd say that there's a balance that you need to strike between being really broad and sort of open and flexible, because most of us are relatively early in our careers, and so we are maybe open to a lot of sectors and a lot of things, but I think it also helps to be a little bit more focused, at least in terms of that, I'm specifically interested in, let's say, education or, labor markets or whatever your interests might be, because that helps you then zoom in on the specific opportunities that make sense. I think sending out like 50 to 60 applications and just kind of, hoping that some of them work out, I don't know if that's necessarily the best strategy, but again, it's a balance, because you don't want to be too, sort of focused on just that one ideal job, and if that doesn't work out, you don't want to have, no backup plan. So I'd say that that's kind of something to keep in mind. Other than that, definitely I absolutely agree with using informational interviews and sort of talking to your friends and alumni to really figure out, that's what the 2 years here are really for, to really understand from people who are working in the sector what working at a certain company is like, or working within a certain sector is like. So things that you won't get off the websites of companies, to definitely make the most of that and speak to people and try and get that experience before you make a decision about what to pursue.
Can I just ask a follow-up question there?
Sure.
Just about like targeting a specific opportunity.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if you could like speak a little bit more on like how maybe you identify like a target opportunity that you want to and you wanted, and kind of like how much time you gave yourself to kind of either network or find an internship that was aligned with it, or kind of how you, and if you didn't identify a target, that's totally fine. But I think that that's one strategy I've tried to use, and I'd be interested to hear more about that too.
That's a pretty hard one, because there are times when you have a specific opportunity come up and they're looking for somebody to join, like, in a couple of weeks, and then you don't necessarily have that much time to speak and network and, prepare as you would like to, and then maybe you just need to sort of do your best and write like as targeted a cover letter and resume as you can and send it in. But there are, organizations that tend to hire cyclically, and you kind of know that this is around the time that they'll start opening, or there are organizations like the bank, etc., that almost always seem to have, certain at least short-term positions or things that are open throughout the year. So then that gives you a little bit more time to do your research. But it's hard, because sometimes you have that ideal thing, and they've sort of the deadlines in a couple of days, and you have to take your shot.
No, for sure.
Yeah.
But I can talk about that. Like, I didn't end up getting the job, but I applied somewhere for a summer internship. I didn't get it. They put me in touch with 3 people who worked at the firm. Over the next 10 months, I talk with them every 6 weeks, just like, hey, this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm doing this summer. I'd like to hear about what your work is, what projects you're doing. So that I was always sort of top of mind with them for 9 months. And I actually got to a final round interview through them for the full-time position because they knew me for so long. They could see that I was committed to their organization. So sometimes internships, even if you don't get them, are great opportunities to connect and then follow up the next 6 months before you apply long-term, sort of build that relationship over time, and it really shows how you're committed to an organization.
I had a similar experience. I don't want to keep talking at people can, but I had a similar experience. This summer I worked with UN Women in Panama City, and I regularly with my boss, to both of my bosses and a few of the people that I work with who jump all around. Some of them are global, they rove, and then some are based in New York, some are based in Panama and country offices, and constantly, like every 6 weeks, I just like send them an email, just hi, and like, I had great relationships with them there. That was important to cultivate from the beginning, but I would agree, just like making yourself, and I don't really want to work at the UN, but they know people, and they know people in other organizations,
Yes.
and they're well connected in the circle that I want to be in, but maybe not with them. And so, that's been, I completely agree. I think just capitalizing on the relationships that you already have, don't have to be big, they don't have to be formal unless that's your relationship, but just keep yourself sort of in people's minds. And I think that as long as the work that you are doing when you have sort of needed to report to them is strong, they're gonna have a wonderful memory of you. So there's no harm in doing that, I don't think.
Can I just also say something which is exactly to Carolyn point? The students of our students who already graduated, or you're in your second year, I think that same strategy also applies to professors, right? So if you have never met a professor and talked about your job search or where you want to go, and then you've never gotten in touch with them again after that there are too many ideas in there are too many people, there's too much information in their head to remember that. But if you are every 6 weeks or 8, just dropping them here, this is what I'm doing, I'm still interested in doing X, things come up. Opportunities, people send opportunities to your professors all the time, like all the time. I'm looking for somebody to start in 3 weeks. I'm looking for somebody, do you think you might have somebody for this project in 6 weeks? And you know, that's just serendipitous, because if Laura's the last person who wrote to me, you know, like a week ago, and then this opportunity comes up, then the first person that comes to my mind is Laura.
Mm-hmm.
And you just like, that's just, you know, because, and it's not because, and I honestly, because I think all of you are so great, it's literally like the last person who wrote to me is the first person who will come to my mind, you know, and I think then I can do the sort of sorting in my head and saying, oh, Laura doesn't want that kind of job, now, you know, what can I think about? And at that point, I might think about somebody, or I might just send it to Nicole and say, Nicole, just put this on the opportunities newsletter. Right? So I think that staying connected is really important. And I don't know why this is the case, but sometimes students said to us in not this year's town hall, but last year's town hall, and said that we're really hesitant to reach out to the faculty and to adjunct faculty, etc., about our job search, especially when we're done with our class with them, we're not seeing them on a regular basis anymore. Maybe we took a class with them last year and it's already been 8 months. And I said, you have to know that when people join the profession that I'm in or choose to teach, this is just a part of what we expect our responsibility will be. Your writing and reaching out to somebody like that is not considered rude, it's not inappropriate, it's not out of the ordinary. This is what we expect you to do. In fact, the reverse is out of the ordinary. So the fact that you know, staying in touch the way that you do or that you did with somebody with whom you worked is perfectly okay. In fact, it is expected that you will do that. The reverse of some not getting in touch with you at all for 5 years and then writing to them and saying, I'm moving back to DC, I'd like to get a job, I want to talk to you. Like, wait, who are you? I forgot. Like, what did you do? Where have you been for 5 years? Right? So you're not bugging people by staying in touch. That's all I wanted to say.
That's great. I think people have already touched the most important points, but I want to share my personal experience, like how I changed my job searching strategies, like in the past year. So at the beginning, I guess most of the international student or like Chinese student will just so it's like you put up a list of your experience and you look at the job description and you sort of like want to tailor yourself to apply for the job without really understanding what they're looking for. And a lot of international development jobs at the beginning, for me at least, is not very familiar because we came from very different backgrounds and we are not very imposed in this industry. So a lot of things might turn out to be like very different than your understanding. So that was what I've been doing for a long time, and the result wasn't very good. Like a lot of cover letters and resumes you sent out never really got back to you. And this semester, I started to really focus on, like, I really asked myself, like, what are the industries you are looking at, and like, which of them are feasible at this moment, and what are those that you really want to approach in the next term? Because there are different, like, for our visa status, we are not the ideal employees at this time, like, for the private sector. So I came here with a background in social enterprise and wanted to impact investing. But through like all those informative interviews I did in the past 3 months, people don't have a plan to hire an entry-level employee who didn't have background in this industry, and this is a fact. It didn't say like you won't get a job like in your life, but probably not this moment. So what is feasible, what is ideal? You need to put them into 2 categories and don't stop networking on each of them. Yeah, and people give you really good advices, and my experience is coming to people who have the same background as you, say like international students. They understand your visa status, they understand what might constrain you like in the job hunting, and they probably give you like better ideas at the beginning. But I'm not saying like don't network with other people. They're also like very helpful. Yeah.
No, I really like that idea of having kind of like two buckets, which one is like a long-term goal and having a set of kind of like networking contacts that you're trying to like build towards something, and it might be in 2 years or it might be in 5. And then also the immediate of like, in 3 months, I need to be earning money. Or something. But, you know, because I've run into similar roadblocks where I've gone down a path of networking and building, and then it's a dead end at the end. They're like, no, we're not gonna hire you, but you seem like a nice guy. And then, and so you end at a point where, but those contacts don't have to die, but they kind of move into a long-term bucket.
Dormant.
Well, like where you keep in touch with people.
Right.
I did a similar thing to Harrison of like trying for certain places where I do think I would want to work there, of keeping some people, like when I'm starting a new internship or doing something, anything different, I'll email them.
You need references for the rest of your life.
Mhm.
You need to have references from every stage of your life. You need to have some people who've known you for 5 years, and some people who've known you for 3 months, and some people.
Mhm.
So staying in touch with that long-term bucket, or whatever you're
Mhm.
calling them, is not gonna hurt.
Mhm.
What does that look like in real life? For like, what kind of things are you sending in those emails that maybe are dead ends, but you're wanting to keep in touch with that person? So is it like you said, like when you get a new opportunity, I guess, just practical things that, when should you be sending those kind of emails, and what do you say in those emails?
Well, so for like a professor, I was nervous to ask her for a job or an internship, but I asked for her advice on like if I saw a posting, what would she think? And so she would just give me like feedback on like that organization. So that made it pretty easy because there's a posting every 2 weeks. I mean, I could send her an email every day if I wanted to, but that gave an opportunity for me to always have kind of an in, because she also agreed in the first email that she was happy to do that. So that was for a professor. For the job places, you know, I would say that I sent some emails where there wasn't much of an update, but just saying that like I was still like interested,
Okay.
and some of these people were SICE alums and some weren't. And then for other ones, whenever I had started something different, either in school, like a school activity that I had done. So if that was like the Social Enterprise Accelerator Fund, I was like, oh, this is what I'm working on for that, and it's been useful. Or I'm taking these kinds of classes this semester as opposed to last semester, stuff like that.
Yeah.
I think another good example is, so I was fortunate, so I have a role now post-SICE, but my plan is in the next month or so to reach out to everyone I talked to in the past 6 months and say, hey, I had this opportunity, thank you again for all your help, you know, I look forward to staying in touch, because like, I want to be in the impact investing space, which is small, and a lot of development, everyone kind of knows each other, so even if you get a job somewhere else, it's really useful to build these connections over time, and a lot of them are SICE alumni who come to SICE like every once in a while and know a lot of people, so it never hurts to stay in contact, whether or not that's your first job after SICE. Because again, it's both a short-term and a long-term play.
I ask because I used to be very hesitant to send those kind of emails because I never knew what to say in them, or like what kind of things people would, you know, want to hear.
So when you graduate next year, you're gonna have job A, right?
Yeah.
Like whatever that is, right? So the way that I've done that, and a lot of my alumni do that with me, and it's been wonderful, is when they are switching jobs or they get a new assignment, they'll send me a little note saying, hey, hope things are going well. I just want you to know I moved from Zambia to Zimbabwe, and I'm doing X now. Or I'm living in Rakhine State and looking at X, and I think that I'll be here for two years, but at that point I'm going to be looking for a job. Like I couldn't do this for more than 8 months, you know? 8 months is a long time to give me a heads up, but the idea that I know that X person is now going to be finishing up and is 3 years out and is coming back. Next time somebody writes to me and says, we're looking for somebody who does gender-based violence work and can be in, I'm like, oh, I know the perfect person for you.
I do agree that it's pretty awkward. I mean, I definitely agree with you. And I've had a certain percentage of people not volunteer to keep emailing with me or to stay in touch. You know what I mean? Like they just don't, they stop responding.
Yeah.
Right.
So, you know, and then that feels super embarrassing because then you're like, okay, so this person is not interested.
But that's okay.
But going back to, I'm sorry, Carolyn. The idea that sometimes people are too busy. So I try not to take it too personally
Yeah.
either, of like me sending a random email like they don't, it's not really asking for much of a response. So they may just read it and be like, okay.
Totally.
And I'm gonna go on with my day. So it can be a little, or feel a little uncomfortable, but I feel like after the first one, it feels a lot less uncomfortable.
Like Seth.
And also, if they ignore your email, they're not going to remember your name. So it's not that they're going to meet you and say like, oh, that name was. I just send the email and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
My strategy for compensate for that is I try to be an interesting person. So I hate to be in a situation where it feels that you're just asking for things to people. So try to be genuinely interested in what they do and ask questions about the topic. So I wanted to have an internship at CEPAL, ACLAC, the UN Commission. So what I did before was just going to events. When there's a report line, you just go there and try to know what they're doing and try to ask questions, and kind of then when they need someone, they might remember you. Not as someone that is just there asking for tips and jobs and internships, but as someone that is really interested in the topic. So in the future, you be recognized as an expert or something close to that. And also another thing that I do, I'm really bad with names. Memory is really, really helpful. So I have a list of all the companies that are here that I might want to be interested in the future, and also names of people I've met, because then I pretty quickly forget and never remember they exist. So sometimes I go back and say, oh, I met someone in an event 1 year ago. Maybe I know, check what they're doing and send a message.
Yeah, keep a file of everyone you speak with, for sure. Maybe a 5-minute pause for pizza. I think I see where all you're looking right now. So, yeah, go for it. So, hope you all enjoyed the pizza. Just, we still have like 20 minutes. So, if there's any questions you have for any of us, Tanvi, or Setu, or any of our esteemed students, feel free to ask. Open floor for everyone to ask questions. I got pizza. Dangerous, but a minute, we can let people leave for another. Stand up.
Hi. Did anyone in Bologna have any questions?
Their expressions are.
Sometimes the logic.
Is
Interview process. Yeah.
Oh, is that Katie?
Yeah.
Ask the question again. Do they have any?
Do you guys have any questions, Bologna?
Oh, she needed us. Don't let you ask.
I think something that was brought up was the references, and Tammy, you touched upon this, is always keeping in touch, but can you just go over what the proper way to ask for references is, and how far in advance, and, just any advice on how to ask for references?
Oh, yeah. Well, Setu should talk about references that are maybe, Setu can talk about professional references, and I can tell you about the academic reference because I'm not doing professional references anymore. So typically, and this is different professors do it differently, and Professor Donsife is here too, but Dan and I would like to be told, or asked, would you be a reference for me? Several weeks, months, enough in advance that I know before you even applied for a job that you are expecting that I would be writing your references. Then I would say yes or no. At that point, it's incumbent on you and me to come up with 2 or 3 paragraphs about you and keep them somewhere. I just keep them in a file. And then as soon as you apply for a job, then you send me an email saying, or not maybe just as you apply, but when you hear back and if you make it to the first round or whatever, then you have to send me a note saying, I've made it to the first round or the second round, they may be contacting you for references shortly, right? Because sometimes it's completely not in your control and it's very crazy. I mean, ask Ada, I've had to do reference checks, I'm traveling all over the world and I'm writing reference letters at midnight and calling people because it's not your fault. Sometimes what will happen is the
people that you apply for a job with will want a reference check done within 24 hours, or they'll want a letter of reference being sent to them within 2 days. So you should also tell them, hey, one of my referees is traveling. It would be great if you could give them as much time as possible to write this letter and send it for me. Sometimes you can't. That is why it's really important that you have your referees and your stuff done like weeks in advance. Some professors will say, no matter who it is, if you don't have 2 weeks for me to finish your reference letter, I will not send it for you. And, or a week, or whatever it is, right? Because they're traveling, they may be out in the field, it may not be possible, which is why that is really important to have that time. The second thing, and I want to say this really clearly, especially if they're first year students here, but make sure to tell other first year students. And I don't know if Professor Dornside feels the same way, I know Dan feels the same way, I know Brian does. If you have not taken a class with that particular person, it is very difficult for us to do an academic reference for you. Even if you've worked with them closely in other capacities, it's very difficult. If your reference letter is only about reflecting on organizational skills, receptivity to that kind of a managerial, then fine, I'm happy to comment on that, right? Sometimes people have done the practicum and they say, oh, now will you be my reference? And I will not, because there is no piece of work that you will be handing to me that only you have done. A team of people have done it. So if somebody writes to me who's been in the practicum and says, will you respond? I will respond on your attendance at meetings, how well you did your final project, how your client responded to you, et cetera, but I will not be able to go into the same depth as with somebody who's taken a class with me. So, right?
Mm-hmm. I would say the same standards apply for references from me.
Yeah.
There are 1 or 2 exceptions in my world, in the sense, so Jennifer, who has served as the SAF, the Social Enterprise Accelerator manager for this entire year, and she was also in the SAF last year as a participant.
Yeah.
I would be able, and she's also been in one of my classes, so, but I was going to say,
Yes.
had she not been in my class, I would still be willing to give you an academic reference based upon your work with the SAF.
Yeah.
So if you've worked really, really closely with a faculty member and you haven't taken one of their classes, make sure that the relationship is, in addition to having professional relationship, that you have an academic relationship. Ask them. As much lead time as you can give anybody. Just remember, just put yourself in our position, and you just say, I've got this wonderful job, and they're gonna call you tomorrow, is that okay? Just think how you'd feel, with all the other things that you've got. So remember that we will work with you, and we'll just bend over backwards to make things happen for you, but as much as possible, give us lead time. For a pure academic reference, if you're going on, what I mean by that is going on for a PhD or another degree, if you haven't been in my class, it will be very difficult for me to respond. So just to say, everything that Professor Nagpal has just said, I definitely agree with. So you can count Dan Honig, Brian Levy, Tanvi Nagpal, Cinnamon Dornside is feeling very much the same about academic references. And we will definitely, especially those of you that have been in our classes, go to bat for you, especially if you've done such a really good job for us.
Yeah.
We've got your back. We want you to succeed.
And I mean,
Make
if
it
you
easy
get a
for us.
B minus in a class or a B in a class, don't ask that professor for a reference.
That's right.
Right, I mean, it's really being frank, right? Like, don't try to ask for a reference in a class in which you did well.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're applying for the job, send your referee your CV again, your latest transcript again, the job description again. Why do you want to do that job?
Mm-hmm.
How does it fit brief paragraphs so that they know this is my job going to be. This is how I will do, this is why I want to do it, and this is why I will do it well. Because then we can draw that upon that language and weave that into our reference letter.
So for professional references, if you are actively job hunting, you should keep a running list of former supervisors from past internships, full-time positions. Make sure you have their updated information. You want to always include title, employer, email, phone number. And then it's a good idea to reach out to them. So for second-year students, send them an update, just wanted to let you know I'm going to be completing my master's, at SAIS. I'm applying to positions that let them know what, the industry sector that you're targeting, and I'd like to know that I can count on you for a reference. I think it also helps to know that you can count on them for a strong reference, and sometimes I say ask them. And then you want to make sure when you ask them whether or not you can, let's say you're asked for references, ask them whether or not you can list them as a reference. Send them the position description and let them know what you would like them to highlight. If there's certain skills that that employer is looking for, let them know. I would really appreciate it if you could touch on the work that I did on X, Y, and Z. They're looking for someone with these skills. The more information that you give them, the better they'll be able to advocate for you. Most of the time they will, for employers, unless it's a fellowship or something that's more academic, all they want you to provide them is, the name. They're not gonna ask for a letter of reference. I think, Tommy touched more on what you would need for a letter of reference. Most of the time it'll be a phone call, or they'll send some questions via email that they want your reference to provide for you. But you should be reaching out and letting them know. Even for internships, you will be asked for references. So you need to be reaching out and letting people know I'm actively looking for an internship or a full-time job, and I'd like to know that I can count on you for a reference. Yes?
So what's the typical timing when you'll be asked for a reference?
Usually if you're under serious consideration. So they will, let's say you go for a second round interview, they may say at that point, if you could provide us with 3, it's usually generally 3 references. At least one should be, I think, an academic reference, at least one. But you always want to go with people that know you well. Okay, so if it happens to be 2 academic references from people who know, you well, go with it. All right.
Anybody here, if you, a PhD is a completely different story. If you really wanted to do a PhD reference, I will tell you that every time I do references for PhD students, they apply to several universities. It can take me almost a week to do references for one person. Same, right. And I've done many. Last year I did 2. They were both successful. 2 years before that I did 1. That was also successful. It is a long process. It's a lot of conversations. It's a different letter for every university. It's finding different professors at that university that you can highlight, that you can connect to. It's a whole different, it's a very long, involved, and very, very, very difficult process. And so if you at some point decide that that's something you want to do, also remember that you really have to ask people way in advance.
Very much in advance.
Any other questions here in DC? Yeah.
Yes. Can you talk a little bit about the networking experience with Multilateral, the bank IMF? Have you seen any differences between these organizations and other smaller organizations?
The question was about networking with multilateral organizations.
I could go first. I would say definitely the experience is quite different when you're networking with somebody, let's say at the World Bank versus, first of all, because smaller NGOs or other organizations may not always be able to sponsor visas for international students, so that the conversation can be more about, just largely about the sector, about the work they're doing, but perhaps not as focused on a job when you're speaking with somebody from there, whereas with the World Bank, usually that's not as much of an issue. I would only recommend that sometimes people say that, you should reach out directly to people who are managing projects, so they're called task team leaders, so people who are basically in charge of a massive project, and they are the ones who are making the decisions on who to have on the team and who to hire and so on. And so they are usually the ideal people to reach out to. I would say that don't discount reaching out to people who are not necessarily at as senior a level. I mean, definitely reach out to other people who are also short-term consultants or people who just joined a few months before or who are recent alumni, because they can provide really useful strategies on how to reach out, who to reach out to, and so on. So I would say that don't only be looking at the most sort of senior level of people who you think might be able to hire you.
And just to follow up on that, I was talking with Saksham, who's another first-year student, and he was recently been networking at the bank, and one thing he said was, if you go right to those TTLs, those testing leaders, if you don't have like your story straight and your lingo like 100% right about how you're gonna fit in with that team and that task, then it's wasted. And so you really want to start at a lower level of networking to make sure you have all your bases covered and understand the ins and outs of what they're trying to do before you go to that more senior person. And because there is kind of specific lingo within and a kind of different job path that's different than non-multilaterals, I think it's important to, whether with friends here at school or with recent alumni or something, to make sure that you have all the bases squared away before you go talk with those people.
I also think it's important to do your homework before. Like saying, oh, I want to work for the World Bank is easy and kind of common here, but it's not going to help if you just reach out to anyone there and like, hey, I need an internship at the World Bank. So be specific. I want to work in this department, I know what they do, I know the product they are involved, I know what report they write, and that's why I feel like I could be here, I could be helpful, and my background has something to do with this particular department. Because the World Bank is intense, and people there don't know each other, so if you get there and just, hey, I want to know what you do, it's not going to be super helpful. So maybe that's why it's easier and more easier to talk with people more low levels, at least to understand what they do and how that works. Another tip that might be useful is maybe check out with someone from your nationality. It's in your language, they might be more helpful to talk with someone that shares the same culture, and then you understand how you could manage the conversation with people that hired. That's what you have to do in the second step.
I would like to add, we have so many, sorry, I'm trying to do both sides. We have hundreds of SAIS alumni at the World Bank, and our students are reaching out to them all the time. I recommend, though, that you reach out to them rather than just generally your interest in the World Bank, because that's what most people are saying. I'm interested in the World Bank, and the World Bank is huge. You have people who are working on, poultry disease and, microfinance and education. There are people doing everything at the World Bank. Connect with people based on what you have in common, based on your common interests. I see that you're working on X, Y, and Z. I recently did a paper on such and such. Because networking really is about just building relationships. And you want to get to know people with whom you have similar interests, okay? And I think it absolutely is a missed opportunity if you're reaching out to someone who's very senior and you don't know enough about, what they do and the department. So great advice, start with people who are more junior. They tend to have a little bit more time. They've gone through the process recently. And then also do your research.
Usually alumni have nostalgia for SAIS, so they're super excited to talk with students, and they want to ask about how is the happy hour now, and how is the social life at SAIS, how is X and Y professor.
Yeah.
So they are usually it's easier to